Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So today I want to talk about home lab forensic analysis. And so self-hosting applications in a home lab is an acquired skill. And so if you haven't seen a major problem yet, you're probably just still too new to the home lab environment. And so the longer you work at this, the more you will realize that complex problems build stronger analytical skills. And when in doubt, cycle power and reboot. So ask yourself, what did I last change before whatever it is just broke? And so what are the symptoms and what can I eliminate as the cause? So today we're going to step through how I found and fixed a problem that started a month or so ago in my home lab, and I was distracted in the process of trying to fix it, and that made it more difficult. So what exactly did I observe at first, and what made me realize I had a problem? So my internet connection was going offline every day or so, and I just figured that at first I had ISP problems. And my UDM Pro was online, which I could see from the Unify mobile application. And so that let me know that when I came in from outside my network over my mobile data plan, and I could see my UDM Pro with the unified.ui.com interface on the mobile app, then I realized that there was a problem there. And the problem that I noted was that my first core switch sitting beneath my UDM Pro was having a problem. So the fiber downlink from the UDM Pro to my USW Enterprise 24 PoE switch was apparently down, resulting in the entire infrastructure being offline. And when I looked at it through the mobile app, I could see that that switch was in fact offline. So the USW Enterprise switch was indicating offline, and most everything was downline from it. So certainly my desktop computer wasn't responding, and neither were any of my servers, which were further down in the switch infrastructure. So a week later, I had intermittent printing problems to my Brother HL2395 DW laser printer, which I had for about 5 years and really never had any problems with it before. So I was thinking at the time, well, this printer's just going out. Maybe I need to consider getting another printer. So Incus containers were also going offline occasionally, and that had been going on for about a month. And I just kind of likened that to the fact that maybe what it is I just have too much running on the network. I have around 75 Incus containers, multiple servers, and I just thought to myself, well, maybe one of the servers is a little overloaded, and that's why I'm seeing containers bounce. So there were no obvious network problems, and really nothing stayed offline long enough except for the switch, and when the switch went offline, that required manual intervention. So then the question is, no obvious network problems, and that's where you really need to sit down and assess what you think is an obvious problem. So as it turns out, I didn't consider that Uptime Kuma was frequently logging different Incus containers going offline and then also back online. And NetAlert X was also logging Incus containers bouncing. And so I did a video about NetAlert X and network monitoring tools in the home lab in general, where we went over things like Apprise and Godify and NetAlert X. And it's really a valuable tool for tracking these types of events. And so I became somewhat complacent when I'd see those messages, because it had been like the last month or two where I saw things go offline and then immediately come back online. And it really didn't seem to be affecting the performance of any of my containers. So maybe the USW Enterprise 24 PoE switch is just going bad, and maybe it's doing something really bad on the network. So I was kind of thinking in that direction. Or maybe my network configuration on the UDM Pro is corrupted, and in the 5 or 6 years that I've had my UDM Pro, I had one other occurrence where I actually had to rebuild my network configuration. So I thought about that as well. And so I recently updated to Unify Network 10.1.85, but that kind of seemed fine as well, and I really didn't think that that was the problem. So the network did seem slow. And what exactly is slow? And you have to ask yourself, if your network were running slow, how would you define slow and how would you quantify it? So you have to have a way to measure things. So then there was some other random stuff. My brother HL2395DW printer that I mentioned earlier eventually stopped printing completely. However, I was able to ping it. So I wasn't really sure if that was a problem with the printer or maybe a problem with the network, but I kind of just thought, maybe the printer's getting old. So several weeks ago, I also had all of my Chromecast targets vanish from my Chrome browser, and occasionally I will cast my network, or cast my desktop rather, to a Chromecast that I have on my entertainment center. And I noticed that my Chromecast target was not showing up for whatever reason. And so I did some research on that, and that turned out to be a change in the Linux kernel itself, and that was disallowing MDNS or multicast DNS over a software bridge or switch. And so you weren't being allowed to do that anymore. I guess they considered that kind of a security issue. I'm not sure why, but it did change. So what I ended up doing was I brought up my Wi-Fi interface on my desktop computer, and that MDNS traffic could travel over it instead, and it didn't have to use my switch, and so that worked fine. So then I bought a new Brother MFC L3780 CDW since I needed and wanted a printer with an automatic document feeder anyway, and so it was always my plan to replace that older laser printer, and I've been thinking about that and shopping for the last couple of years. And I really do like Brother printers. I feel like Brother printers are really great devices. So this MFC 3780 CDW ended up taking 5 minutes to print a single page, and its web interface took over a minute to display. And I thought, wow, how can the printer possibly be that slow? But in reality, it was. So I thought that the slow printing might be a problem with the Linux IPP everywhere driverless printing that's become very prevalent now in Linux lately, and that renders full page bitmaps before it actually prints them. However, I fired up a Windows virtual machine, and Windows turned out to have the exact same slow printing problem associated with it. So I thought, well, okay, fine. Let's just try to fix this printing once and for all. So I installed the Retro LPR LPD printing support in Linux, and I also tried installing PCL print support. And that didn't help, so I tested scanning, figuring out, well, if I can't print, maybe I can scan. But unfortunately, scanning also had the identical problem that printing had, being really slow or maybe not scanning at all. So the network went down again, and it was because my USW Enterprise 24 PoE switch went offline, severing the connection from the UDM Pro to all of the other switches downline from it. So this is getting pretty frustrating because now the switch keeps going offline. So why am I having random switch problems while working with broken printers? And that's something that should occur to you at this point. So, okay, let's just take a step back and let's figure out what's going on with the switch. So the switch is offline, and I'm able to restart it from the LCD display on the front of the switch. I can cycle through the various screens, so it's not like the switch is locked up. It's just showing in the mobile app that it is offline. Of course, I can't get to it from the desktop because my desktop goes through a couple of other switches that are below that switch. But in any case, I'm able to cycle through those options and choose restart from the LCD display. And when the switch comes back, everything downline from it, curiously, will not readopt. Normally, if you have a switch go offline and it is maybe your first switch or your first core switch on the other end of the router, and it has switches behind it, normally when the one that is offline comes back online, everything will come back, and it should have gone through a Ubiquiti Unify readopt operation, but it did not. Those switches just kind of sat there unable to communicate. And so likewise, the same with my Wi-Fi, because my Wi-Fi access points are all on a switch below that switch. So I cycle power on everything. I basically power off all of the switches, and I even power off the UDM Pro, and I boot everything back up, and everything is fine and dandy, and the problem is fixed. So I swap out my 10G Tech small form factor pluggable multi-mode fiber modules that connect the fiber connection between the UDM Pro and the USW Enterprise 24 PoE switch, because after all, when this thing goes offline, the thing that's probably the problem would be the SFP Plus modules, or at least that would be my feeling. And that seemed to be the problem, and that fixed it, right? Okay, so now back to the printing problem. Well, maybe it's time to look at some scanning. So scanning uses Apple AirScan, or also Embedded Scan Control Language, or ESCL, or really SCL for short. And AirScan is super slow also. It's scanning, but it's scanning at the rate of 1 page per minute, which is kind of surprising. And one wonders, if it's a page per minute, why do we even need a automated scanner or an automatic device feed? So I tried the Scanner Access Now Easy, or SANE interface. I bet you didn't know that Scanner Access Now Easy is the acronym for SANE, or the expansion of that acronym. And I tried that as an alternative. SANE was the replacement for the very old Twain scanning protocol, and SANE had the same sorts of issues. So on a whim, I decided to test scan and print on the old HL2395DW after having cycled power and everything. And wow, it actually scanned, and it actually scanned much faster. Interesting. So the HL2395, the older printer, has a fast Ethernet NIC, which is your 100 megabit NIC, and the MFC 3780 CDW has a full gigabit NIC, making it 10 times faster. So of course the printer with 1/10 the speed is much faster than the one with 10 times the speed, which makes no sense. So then the HL2395DW stops printing and stops scanning completely. So boom, the USW Enterprise 24 PoE switch goes offline again, even after having swapped out the two SFP Plus modules. So now this is getting really interesting. So when in doubt, reboot, of course. So I reboot the UDM Pro on a whim, and printing works for a little while. And I ping the printer from my desktop. And I wish I'd had the old printouts. I didn't think to store them at the time. It's because I was more focused on fixing the problem. But this is like a little screenshot of when I did the ping to the old printer, which is 172.16.1.88. But you can see here that the pings are an average of around 60, 70, 80 milliseconds. And that's pretty darn slow. I mean, you would expect a sub 1 millisecond on a fast network. So now the title of this slide is Layer 2 Poisoning. So pinging my other servers on the network, we're averaging 200 to 400 millisecond latency, and that was on servers that had a 2.5 gigabit NIC, and in some cases 10 gigabit interfaces. So 400 milliseconds is darn near a half-second ping, and that is really slow. So I turn both printers off. And I reboot the UDM Pro again, which flushes the ARP cache. It clears the content addressable memory tables. It resets the bridge learning, and it forces a clean MAC to IP mappings once again, and we have a wonderful, freshly booted network. So despite a single NIC, both printers seem to be creating a spanning tree protocol problem, and they seem to have a layer 2 MAC address pinning issue. How that is, I can't imagine, because they each have one NIC. Well, I suppose they have two because each of them has a built-in NIC and also the wireless NIC, but I'm not using the wireless NIC for anything at this point. So it's like the brother printers have an internal bridge, and that internal bridge is looping on itself, and that's a good novice way to describe what's going on. So now we're going to talk about Apple, AirPrint, and Brother. So just for fun, I factory reset both printers. And I managed to get into the web interface, which, by the way, was really slow. Not only printing was slow and not only scanning was slow, but the web interface for both printers was almost non-existent. And right after rebooting or factory resetting both printers, I managed to get into the web interface for the new printer. And I disable AirPrint. So this is a picture of the screen there, the setup screen, or part of the setup screen for the protocols on the MFC L3780 CDW. It's pretty similar on the other printer as well. And they have this section called IPP down here. And of course, it's enabled for Internet Printing Protocol, which is what we want. And that supports the Linux driverless printing. And it also supports Windows printing as well. So there's a check mark down here for AirPrint, and AirPrint's enabled by default. And so I find that interesting, and I go ahead and I disable AirPrint, I don't know, just on a whim. So that makes some progress. I can now ping the new printer with the expected performance and also without any packet loss. And now notice that I'm actually pinging the new printer, which is a 172.16.1.2. The thing that it didn't capture in the old screenshot was not only were the pings running 80, 90, 120 milliseconds, but I was also getting some pretty extreme packet loss. You can see here now with AirPrint disabled, I've got like a 0.16 to 0.200 milliseconds. So, I mean, this thing is really much faster. So with AirPrint off, unfortunately, that breaks scanning. So apparently disabling AirPrint turns off their MDNS stack, which breaks the ESCL service, and it also affects some things regarding IPP printing functions, particularly things like a feedback to the cups printing system in Linux telling it that a print job is completed. So here's a healthy MDNS search for scanning services. If we get back to scanning here. And this printout looks pretty good. Again, I wish I had captured the one where when it scanned for these services, it couldn't find it. But what you're looking at here is you're looking at both printers, the newer printer and the older printer, and it's finding the scanning services correctly. And that's after everything was fixed. So I don't want to say that after I disabled AirPrint that was the case, because when AirPrint was disabled, I wasn't getting these things at all. But this is what a healthy scan should look like. So, I'd want to go back and turn on AirPrint to give me my MDNS back. But if I do that, of course, that's going to break the whole network. So the bottom line of this is MDNS for ESCL is good, AirPrint bad. So this is clearly a Brother firmware version 1.42 problem, and that version of the firmware came out right about 2.5 weeks ago. And I think that's about the time when I started having problems with the old printer as well, and it just got a firmware update, and I can't really even comment why it had the problem, but it got the problem about the same time that the new printer did. And the new printer, when it came in, it fired up, and immediately it said, well, I got a software update. Do you want to take it? And of course I said yes, which was probably the kiss of death, but I did it anyway. So then what I did is I went back into the printer and I turned on the AirPrint capability, but then I went into my zone-based firewall on the UDM Pro, and I basically block AirPrint and Bonjour, which is the other name for MDNS traffic, to the new printer and also to the old printer. And I basically say, okay, so if the destination is the new printer or the old printer, then go ahead and block port 5353. I know this sounds a little bit backwards. I thought it was backwards too, but that's how it's set up. And then what I did is I allowed the web interface to the printer, and I did that by taking the two printer addresses again, and I said, let's make sure that they have access to port 80 and 443 for the web interface, and then port 631 for cups. And then finally, I did a video a long time ago about a network scanner program, which is really freaking awesome. And rather than installing scanner software on all my computers individually, I had always had this network scanner software online, and it's a simple Docker container and it runs really great. So it's running at address 172.16.4.4, so I went ahead and allowed it on port 5353 down to both printers. Okay, so now with AirPrint safely firewalled from the network, all my general MDNS Bonjour broadcast traffic on UDP port 5353 to everything on the network is now blocked, and broadcast floods and router cache poisoning is avoided. So the Brother turns off MDNS when AirPrint is turned off, and that broke the scanning language protocol, which prevents scanning, and that's one of the reasons why I needed a solution where I could turn AirPrint back on, because that was Brother's decision on how they implemented MDNS. And when you turn off AirPrint, apparently it basically turns off all MDNS. Not good. So then what I did was I enabled AirPrint on both printers with the firewall rule in place. And scanning and printing are now fast and reliable. So this is a Brother firmware version 1.42 problem, which I ended up reporting to Brother. However, that was kind of a nightmare because actually getting them the information and hoping that I'll ever get a response is kind of slim, because not only do we have firewalls on networks, but we have firewalls between us and also OEMs to prevent us from actually reporting real problems. But again, there's no such thing as buying open source hardware. So, next thing I wanted to do was I wanted to make it faster. Yes, it was fast, but it still seemed to be a bit laggy to me. So I found that by disabling the IPv6 stack on the Brother printers, I gained back a lot of performance and an uncharacteristically great amount of performance. I'm not sure why, but by default, they have both the IPv4 and IPv6 stack enabled on the Brother printers, and with IPv6 and IPv4 enabled, it caused the printer to lag overall. But when I turned off IPv6, things started to run much, much better. So extensive testing showed that after these changes to the old HL2395DW, the NIC was locking up. And I say locking up because it got to the point where if I'd walk up to the printer and I'd try to press a button on the front panel, all it would do is beep at me. I could ping the printer, but I couldn't print to the printer, and I couldn't scan from the printer. So I reconfigured the HL2395DW to use a wireless connection, and ironically, that fixed it. I'm not sure why, but I'm going to say that that printer started to have hardware problems with its NIC, and it's still able to print, so I'm going to hang in there and continue to use it occasionally. So after all this, network performance was not completely restored because I had to go back and cycle power on all of my layer 3 switches because they cache all of this information. So I ended up cycling power on the UDM Pro again and on all the switches with the firewall rules in place. And after power cycling all of the network switches, complete performance was restored. We can now print quickly, we can now scan quickly. So in summary, Brother printer implementation of AirPrint in their MDNS stack floods the network with UDP port 5353 broadcast. And I kind of liken this to being a denial of service attack on your LAN, and that's never a good thing, but I never imagined that this was going to be the issue. So my recommendation is either to disable AirPrint or firewall off port UDP 5353, except to specific systems that specifically require it, but apparently those broadcast storms have a very negative effect on your router and if you have any layer 3 switches. So my USW Enterprise 24 PoE has not gone offline since this fix, and I actually waited about a week after I had finished all of this just to make sure I wasn't lying, and sure enough, it's all reliable now. So there was nothing wrong with my SFP Plus fiber modules, and so I guess I have a couple in spare now. In any event, I really do like this model that I mentioned earlier of those, and so I have some of those in my spares now in the event I have a legitimate problem with them. So ping speeds are fast, the UDM Pro router performance is restored, and both printing and scanning are now working perfectly. So we have some more summary here. So when you have a strange network problem, be sure to sit down, look at it carefully, slow down, go someplace quiet, write down all of the symptoms. You have to think about what were the last changes you made. Did you make any firmware updates? Do you have any new devices on your network? Do you have any new software on your network? Everything you observe is important. So make sure that you've got all your wits about you. Don't be half asleep. And the person that I'm addressing here certainly understands what I'm saying. Don't be half asleep when you attempt to achieve this, because you really need all your wits about you in order to figure out what might be wrong with your network. And address one problem at a time. And most importantly, make one fix at a time and test that fix before you move on to doing anything else. And finally, as your home lab matures, more complexity equals bigger problems, and really there's no way around that. You kind of buy off on the fact that as you grow more and more complexity, you're going to have greater and greater problems, which hopefully your experience will help you resolve sooner rather than later. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit your notification bell, and we'll see you next time.